Welcome to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and I'm so glad you're here because this show today is truly one of my favorites of all time, and I've been doing this around 5 years. So please stick around because I want you to meet Steve Little. And I'll tell you a bit about him in just a moment. But first, I want to remind you that for those of you who are new to me, I am the author of 3 books. Chakras, the Magnificent Seven, which is kind of a primer to understanding and balancing your chakras. I've also written Grief, When Will This Pain Ever End? And that one is a compendium of tools and processes and articles that can help you move through your grief and not get stuck in it and become it. And then finally, I wrote Saying the Right Thing When You Don't Know What to Say. And I love this little book because it really gives you absolute sentences that are great, helpful, and healing to say, and those that are not helpful at all that you want to avoid. All of those books are available on Amazon. I also am a life transition coach. So when people are going through change, sometimes it's very uncomfortable for them. And that's the work I do. I help them make those changes smoother and more productive. And that's also part of the mission of this show. We try to bring information to people to make change smoother and more productive, or we want to spotlight people who are change makers, who are trying to make the world a better place. And also, I am a speaker and obviously your host here on Change It Up Radio. If you want to learn more about my work or reach out to me on any of those levels, you can get that information at paulashaw.com. That's paulashaw.com. And if you want to learn more about this show, if you want to hear past shows or get information on becoming a guest or a sponsor of this show, you can get all that information on changeitupradio.com. That's changeitupradio.com. All right. Without any further ado, let me talk a little bit about this interview you're about to hear. Steve Little is a real enigma because he's a brilliant businessman who has made millions over the years, but he's also a kind of a guru. He's also this spiritual giant, and knowing him has truly been one of the most profound experiences of my life. And he and I sat down at the Bottle Rock Music Festival where I was invited up by Paula to be one of the podcasts representing the whole event. And it was just my favorite day, the day Steve and I had some time on our hands and we sat down and started talking. And right then and there, I knew I had to have this man on my show because I want you all to meet him too. He's very, very special. I'll tell you a little bit about him according to his bio, but this doesn't give you any insight into the amazing giant of a human that he is. But he is an acclaimed serial entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, and mergers and acquisitions expert, known for generating accelerated value growth and extraordinarily high acquisition value multiples for his companies and clients. He sold his first company at age 15 for $250,000. And that's a story that you're going to get to hear. And he's just never looked back. He's founded and scaled 6 successful startups of his own to private 9-figure acquisitions. So his company, Zero Limits Ventures, spots unique opportunities for valuation and growth where others don't. And he is the guy who would make that happen. And one of the companies that he is working with and he is chairman of right now is Paula. the podcast platform that is my current favorite, and I hope you're listening to us on Podopolo. It offers so many wonderful, unique features. So, my goodness, this man's been known as the Activator. He's personally taught and coached and mentored hundreds of business owners, corporate executives, and entrepreneurs. One of the more beautiful parts of Steve, besides his beautiful spirit, is he supports Young Life Africa, and the needs of hundreds of children and orphans in Malawi, Africa. He supports the Pachamama Alliance. He supports, oh my goodness, so many, so many other projects. The BVI Art Reef Project, extensive global ocean cleanup, and a program called Beneath the Waves, trying to save a certain species of sharks in the U.S. and British Virgin Islands. So I guess you get the picture. He's smart. He's made a lot of money. He's conscious and he cares. And that's why I'm so excited about this interview. So I hope you enjoy hearing it as much as I enjoyed doing it and experiencing it. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Steve Little. Welcome to Change It Up Radio with Paula Shaw. I am very excited about the man I get to introduce you to today. His name is Steve Little, and I find his name kind of amusing. I've never shared this with Steve, but when I found out his last name was Little, I thought it was kind of fun that his last name was Little, and he's a giant of a man. He is just a huge man on every level, spiritual, physical, every level, and mental. So, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Steve, and we're going to just get this conversation going because I have to say, it all began for me at the Bottle Rock Music Festival in Napa when Steve and I had time to just sit down and chat. And I have been so excited ever since then to introduce him to you. So, Steve, welcome today.
Thanks
I'm
for having me. I
so
appreciate it.
I'm thrilled that we get to have this chat for my listeners. So, I always, Steve, think it's important for people to get a sense of how did it all begin? And I love the story you told me about your first entrepreneurial venture at the ripe old age of 15. So,
Yeah,
could you share a bit about that story with our listeners so they get a
yeah,
sense of how your mind worked even back then when you were just a kid?
right, right. No, it's a fun story, and of course I tell the story regularly in my business, but the context is what I learned in the process, and it's one of those deals where I started my first business when I was 13, and to sort of bury the lead a little bit. Um, what happened was it was one Saturday morning. I was the typical teenager, and my dad was doing his chores around the house, and whatnot, and I was there to help, but I was like a lot of 13-year-olds, more of a hindrance than a help. And he finally got frustrated with me. He says, "Hey, get the heck out of here. Go cut the grass or something." I said, "I'd be happy to do that, but I don't know how." So he yanked the lawnmower out of the garage and put it out there in the yard and started it and said, "All right, you just walk back and forth. That's how you do it." So now we had about an
Basic, but
acre.
true.
Yeah, yeah. We had about an
Uh,
acre lot, so it was a good sized lot, and we're cutting it with a little tiny 24-inch lawnmower. And I was in Pennsylvania in the summertime. It was hot. And the grass was blowing in the wind and sticking on my sweaty body. And I was like, I went back and forth maybe 3 or 4 times. And I said, this is not for me. I'm not doing this. I saw a neighbor's kid, a little bit younger than I was, but he's sitting in his backyard playing. So I called over to him. I said, "Hey, Scotty, you want to earn $5?" Right? I was getting paid $8 to cut the grass. I paid him five, and he did the cutting. And I sat around and watched him for a while. And it's going to take him a couple hours going back and forth at 24 inches a pass. And I got to thinking that, hey, I bet there's some other guys around here don't want to cut their grass. Right. So I
Mm-hmm.
walked up the street and asked a couple of neighbors if they'd want me to come cut their grass, and they said sure. And so, I said, okay, that's good. And we negotiated a price there and so forth. And then I sort of got the bug. And the next day I went up, got on my bicycle and went door to door all through the neighborhood. And almost everybody said yes. So that was pretty good, and
Mm-hmm.
I realized pretty quickly I was going to run out of Scotty. So I started I started calling other friends and people. And what I found was interesting is that the young friends that I called, the teenagers like I was, they were not very reliable. They'd say they'd do something and then they wouldn't show up, or they'd show up and they wouldn't finish, or it'd get distracted by the ice cream man or something. I don't know. It didn't work out, but I ultimately came up with a better solution. I was driving home from a baseball practice once with my dad, and I saw a bunch of men gathered outside the gas station on the corner near our house. And I said, "What are those guys doing?" He said, "They're day laborers. They stand there and wait for people to come by and hire them to work for the day." It was like a light bulb moment for me. I was like, "Oh, that sounds pretty good. I wonder what they charge." I don't know. So I'd walk down there the next Saturday morning and said, "Hey, I got lawns to cut. Anybody want to cut some lawns?" And everybody's like raising their hand. Hey, I'll do it. I'll do it. So I set up. They were more reliable were workers,
Yes,
right? So
yes.
so long and the short of it, I built that up, and we had about 135 yards we were cutting every week. And one of the things that happened is in the heat in August in Pennsylvania, the grass doesn't grow very quickly, and I used to go door to door and renew every deal every week, and
Ah.
that wasn't terribly efficient. And one day, about five people said, it's not growing that fast. Why don't you come back next week? And I was sort of walking along, this is going to cost me some money. Right? I still have to take care of these workers.
Uh,
So, so I came up with the idea of a contract, like a monthly billing, semi-annual billing, or an annual billing contract. You know, and there was a monthly, quarterly, semi, and annual deal that I made. So the more you sign up for, the better the discount.
and
And
Steve, can I stop you for a minute? Did
yeah,
you have a mentor? Was somebody guiding you? How did you figure all this out?
I, you know, it was really just I didn't want to walk up and down the street and hear no. It's
I love. So you were a natural. You were just a natural entrepreneur.
Yeah, well, as I thought about it when I was writing up the contract, I realized that, we're really only cutting grass about 2.5, 3 months out of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So I needed to expand my service offering. So I came up with, cut the grass in the summer. In the fall, we'll rake the leaves and pick up the twigs and
Ah.
whatnot. In the
Mm-hmm.
winter, we'll shovel your walk and make sure there's no ice on the steps.
Oh wow.
Summer will come in after the rainstorms and pick up all the debris and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole idea was we're just going to keep your yard looking neat and kept,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
We're not doing landscaping or any of the more advanced stuff. We're just going to do all the stuff that you would have to do yourself if we weren't doing it for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I wrote that all up and built a little contract there, and all but one guy signed that contract. And one
Wow.
guy he didn't want to do it, and that was all right.
Mm-hmm.
I only lost one client out of the deal. So that was 135 monthly billing or quarterly billing contracts.
Wow.
And I didn't have to walk up and down the street anymore. I just get on my
Mm-hmm.
bicycle and check everything out, once or twice a week, and everything was churning along pretty good. I bought a bunch of equipment out of the want ads, and I stored it in a neighbor's garage, like that. So that was the deal, and it grew to be a pretty good sized business. And
Mm-hmm.
one day, 2 years later, I was 15, and my dad comes home and says he's been transferred and we're moving. And I
Oh.
said, well, what am I going to do with my business? Well, now at that time in my life, my dad was not really very involved with my life. He was working, he was busy engineer, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, he thought I was just cutting a couple of neighbors' yards. He didn't realize I was doing this, right? So
Yeah.
he said, I think the neighbors will understand if you can't cut their grass anymore. I said, Dad, I don't think you understand. So, I went upstairs and I had this big spiral or loose leaf notebook. You know those old blue cloth notebooks you had in grade school?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
I had the big binder, and I'd written on it in black marker Steve's Big Book of Business, and all the contracts, all the receipts, everything that had anything to do with that business was in that notebook. And I brought that down and put it on the kitchen table in front of him, and he starts leafing through it. He gets about halfway through, and it dawns on him what he's looking at. And he says, "My God, how many are there?" I said, "About 125 to 135, depending on the week." He said,
Whoa.
"How are you doing all this?" I said, "I got a whole crew of guys that I got at the gas station down there. I pay them by the hour. He goes, "Where's all the equipment?" I said, "It's open, so and so's garage, you know."
Uh-huh.
And he's like, I don't have any idea what to tell you. I mean, I'm stunned. He said, "Bring me your bank book." Right. So I went up and I got my bank book and brought it down to him. He flips through it. He said, you make almost as much as I do.
Oh, I love that.
So
At
he said,
15.
I don't have any idea what to tell you. I'm an engineer and I don't know anything about this. And I don't know what you do with something like this. It seems a shame to wind it down. I
Mhm.
said, "Well, I got to be able to sell it. Somebody's got to be interested in it. I mean, there's a lot of work going
Yes.
on here."
Yeah.
And it just so happened that in the next town over, Berwyn, Pennsylvania, the first lawn doctor was moving into the area. They set up their shop down there, and there were a couple other competitors in the area. So I asked my dad one Saturday, "Would you drive me over there and me see if I can get him interested in this thing?" And he did. And I went in and talked to the guy, had put the book down for him, and he had the same experience my dad had. And he called his partner over, and they chit and chatted, and came back and said, "We'll give you 187,000 for it." Now this is 1973,
Oh my
so this is
God.
a lot of
That's
money.
a ton of money in that day.
And
Oh.
so I thought, well, that's pretty good. I said, "That sounds good. Let me think about that." And so I left and got out to the car, and my dad said, "Well, what happened?" I told him. He said, "That's incredible, man. Awesome. Give me the check. I'll put it in your bank account."
Mhm.
I said, "No, no, no, no. I didn't take the check. We're going to go down to the other place and see what they'll give me for it." So, long story short, the second guy gave me 247, and I took the check and gave it to my dad. He put it in the bank, and that was the end of that. It was my
And
first
that
business.
took care of college and then
Yeah,
some.
and then some. That's right. Well, and the funny thing is, the reason I tell that story in the work I do, which is in the banking space, is that I learned about value drivers and what drives the value of a business, and that it wasn't the equipment, it wasn't all the revenue, it wasn't all that. It was those contracts. And if I hadn't had the
Mm.
contracts, the business wouldn't have been worth anything. So,
Yes, good point. Good point. And I think that's really interesting because even at 15, if you had been taking any classes in school to try to help you, the business classes in high school, if they exist at all, are really not going to teach you things on that level. So,
no, as a matter of fact, what's subsequent to, I mean, so I took that experience and parlayed it into a career. I built 6 software companies and took them each to very high 9-figure exits and had a very successful time. I've been very blessed. There's no question about that.
mhm,
But that single lesson is really the thing that helped me do all of that throughout the rest of my career. And then I started giving presentations to entrepreneurial groups.
mhm,
And I would tell the story and I would talk about these things that I describe as value drivers. And universally across the board, people come up to me after that presentation and say, I've never heard this before. How come no one has ever told us this? I mean,
wow,
I have an MBA and no one ever told me this, right? So
interesting.
so they don't really teach this part of business. It's really fascinating to me because it's sort of the only thing that matters in my mind.
And how would you describe a value driver to someone who doesn't know what it is?
Hmm. Well, it's the thing that drives the value of the asset you're building. So when you're building a business, you're building an asset, you're
Mhm.
investing your time, your money, your energy, your life, basically,
Yeah.
into this thing. And it starts out at a fledgling level that it's worth what you put into it. Then over time, if you're generating success and growing the business, you're gaining value. And a lot of people think that value is derived exclusively from revenue and earnings, and those are important factors. But what
Mhm.
I've determined over the 40 years I've been building businesses now is that it's really 24 different factors. and really understanding where you are relative to the value contribution of each of those 24 factors is how you can
Ah,
maximize the value of your business. So
I see. And
things
what
like
would be an example of
yeah,
some of
that's a
those value
great
factors?
question. So, I mean, there are the things that you would expect, sort of the typical kinds of value drivers: revenue, earnings, customer retention, market share, things like that. You would
Mm-hmm.
expect those to be in there.
Right.
There are also some sort of non-traditional factors, things like if you have an impact mission and it's a deeply embedded cultural component of your business,
Mm-hmm.
that increases the value of your business dramatically. Or if you
Ah.
have really deep social intelligence where you have not just social media, but you have deep relationships with a social community, either
Mm-hmm.
through a medium like Facebook or LinkedIn or something, or
Mm-hmm.
separately, right? You could have your own medium, right? That's a high value driver. Um, things like I think I mentioned impact mission. So the key thing there is, it needs to be more than just a charity that you give to. It needs to
Yes.
be something that is culturally embedded in your company, right?
Can this exist in a business that's basically about one person? Like for example, I'm a life transition coach.
Mm-hmm.
So if your business is really about you and the work you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
then does that change the value drivers? And
It
can you sell that with any luck?
uh, some you can. There are some things you have to attend to. So it doesn't change the value drivers. The value drivers are constant across all fronts,
I
right?
see.
But in the case where you have an individual brand, you have to decide how you want to handle the brand, right?
Ah,
So, because in your case, the business is you, and you
mm-hmm.
are the business,
Right.
and so you would have to have in place in order to make it a legitimate transaction. You would have to have in place systems and processes and so forth that could operate without your involvement,
Got it.
and then you would have to not be running the business. You could continue to be the face of the business. That's
Mm-hmm.
okay. You'd have to
Mm-hmm.
be willing to license that, right? So
Yeah.
where I've helped people with this before is, we've said, well, some people they want to be removed from it entirely,
Mm-hmm.
so they have to make a transition over maybe a 2-year period where they gradually pull their brand out of the business. Like it sort of becomes like, powered by Paula
Mm-hmm.
instead of Paula,
I
right?
see.
And then it
Ah.
becomes, with Paula, not powered by Paula. You see, so it gradually you sort of wean that identity out of the business and
Got
replace it,
it.
with a faculty or something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then once it's no longer present, we can then move towards a transaction, right?
I see.
Or you leave it in and license it so that
Mm-hmm.
it's always Paula's business.
Right. Like
Somebody else
my
happens to,
method or the method I created or the whatever.
right,
Yeah.
right. So
Right.
they're buying all of that together, including your name and
Mm-hmm.
face, that kind of thing.
So one of the things about you, Steve, that I find the most fascinating is I almost think of you as sort of the cowboy genius businessman because you have that vibe about you. There's an ease, there's a strength, there's this kind of cowboy energy.
Mm,
And I also know about you that you're not just strictly, bottom line and business reports and all that. There are ways that you work with people that are really much more, I would say, on a spiritual level,
right.
which isn't the average kind of thing one would expect from a man in your position. So, can we talk a little bit about that? Especially, I remember in an interview I heard you do, you talked about how like in mergers and acquisitions and people wanting to sell their businesses, which you help with and do very well, they start get freaking out a bit
Right.
as it gets closer to the end of the sale. So tell me, what have you learned over the
Yeah.
years
Yeah.
that is the most helpful?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. It's related to my personal journey. So along the way, I sort of had my own experience of enlightenment and started to recognize that, there's a lot more going on than I thought there was all those years. And unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
that happened rather late in my life. I was in my 50s when that occurred, but it's been a great journey since. And it's
Mm-hmm.
related to that is that, even then this is a characteristic of the M&A business where, a person that's built a business, they don't really understand how deeply they're connected to that business.
Mm-hmm.
It could be their identity, it
Oh,
could be,
yes.
their love, it could be their passion, it could be, all of their money, it could be
Sure.
so many different attributes of this. And
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to selling it, while logically and even emotionally they can connect with the desire to sell it, like it's
Mm-hmm.
time for me to move on or whatever the case might be,
Right.
as they get closer and closer to that transaction, what we observe as uh, representatives is that they become increasingly irrational, right? It's so
Interesting.
much so that within the last 6 weeks, when it really becomes critical, they can do things that sabotage the transaction.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's crazy things. It's not like, not like normal behavior. Like I had one guy literally called a buyer up and cussed him out on the phone for missing a phone call. It's like,
Oh
okay,
my goodness.
why did you do that? Right?
Yeah.
So, right. And the guy called me and said, hey, no deal, we don't want anything to do with that guy.
Oh, wow.
And it was a large transaction, and so it was difficult.
Mm.
um, and so when you look at those things and you have the number of experiences I had with it, you recognize that it's coming no matter what. And
Mm.
you need to figure out how you're going to navigate through that on an individual basis, because
Right.
everybody's different, as you know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it used to be that we would come up with a couple of different clever ways to sort of get them focused on what's next, right? So it'd be like,
Ah,
rather than like the end game is the transaction, the question I would ask is, okay, so what are you going to do after we give
right.
you the $25 million check, right? I
Uh-huh.
mean, you can't play that much golf, and you got to do something. You're going to drive your
Mm-hmm.
wife crazy. I mean, what are you going to do? And and if you really worked with them on that, they get focused on the next thing, and they can sort of move through the transaction with less trouble.
Mm-hmm.
However, as I sort of had my own growth experience, I started to recognize that a lot of this is energetic. It's not logical. It's not, let's say, of this plane, right?
Yes.
And so I started doing work there. I learned a methodology uh, from Dr. Hugh Len in Hawaii. It's called Ho'oponopono.
Mm-hmm.
It's an ancient Hawaiian healing technique in which you basically cleanse yourself with a mantra. And in the process of doing that, you're clearing out the limitations, the limiting beliefs, the concerns, the trouble spots, the disease actually in
Mm-hmm.
the people around you. So Dr. Len actually cured an entire ward of criminally insane people with this methodology and never met a single one of them.
I'm
Right.
familiar with that story and I find it so fascinating. So, what I understand is he would take their individual files and then he would use the phrases, I believe it's, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, and thank you,
Correct.
right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So, if I'm Dr. Len and I'm looking at that file, am I speaking to this person
Mm.
the in the file or am I speaking to myself as being present in their life?
Mm. To yourself.
To
Right.
yourself.
Yeah. See, there isn't anything out there. There isn't a person out there. It's only in here. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really the difference, right? And once I connected with that, it took me a long time. I worked with it for several weeks before I really got connected with this
Yeah.
reality. And once you're there, you start to recognize that all of your experience is being generated from within you. It's all you. There isn't
Right.
anything else out there, right?
Right.
So if you're in struggle or trial, or even if you're in joy, it's it's being generated from within. It's not
Mm-hmm.
coming at you from the outside, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have experiences that you associate with it, and that's part of the problem, is that we get triggered by experiences and we associate that with something uh, within, and it's not that, right? So you have to sort of flip that over and
Mm.
recognize that you're responsible for the experience you're having, right?
Even
So
in a case like this where he's dealing with others on that ward
mm,
that he didn't even know.
yeah, it's still in his experience,
Ah.
right? And that's
Okay.
how it gets done. Remember, there's no separation. We think what we say and speak, and our minds can get around this notion of others. There's me, and then there's you.
Yeah.
But at an energetic level, there's no distinction.
Right. We're all energy.
We're all energy. So
Mm-hmm.
if you start looking through that lens, you start to realize, well, then it is mine because
Yes.
I am that shared interest. I am that shared energetic source. Right? So we're all in this together. Right. So
So having that awareness, sort of like in 12-step programs, they say if you have the knowledge, you have the responsibility.
right.
So it's kind of that, right? So if you have the awareness that it's all coming from me, if I heal me, then I'm doing
Right.
something to heal others.
Everybody. Right.
Everybody. Yeah,
Everybody.
that's wild.
Right.
And
And
yet
that's
I
how you get
get
to a
it.
tipping point, right? I mean, that's
Mm,
the end of the day. There's no way that an individual, even knowing how enlightened you are, there's no way I can get you to do something,
right.
right? I
Mm-hmm.
can get me to do something,
Uh-huh.
which shows up in you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and that's the distinction,
You
right?
know, that's so interesting to me, Steve, because I am a founding member of the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology.
Ah, nice.
So we've been working with energy for years, since the
Yes, of course,
90s.
of course.
And one of the things I often have said to clients is, the bottom line is we really don't have any control over anybody out there. The only control is over ourselves and our own reactions and responses to things.
Yeah.
But what clients have said to me over and over again is, wow, it's the craziest thing. The more I change, the more everybody around me is changing.
Bingo.
And I think really that explains more clearly than I've ever gotten it before what you're saying when you're talking about Ho'oponopono.
Yeah.
That it is, it is all about me, and there's no ego in that. And
No.
I find that um, when we start thinking it's about others, we give away our power, don't
Yeah.
we?
Yeah, you do. Yeah, and you sort of you turn the frankly the plate of the universe over to somebody else. I mean, it's and
Yes.
here's the thing is that if you take a step back and think about, well, in my personal case, and if you did yours, it'd be the same. We already know that the part of the human condition is the struggle we have with subconscious beliefs and limitations
Right.
that are programmed into us when we're children.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to have a method to deal with those or they rule your life.
Totally.
And it's like,
And you
if
don't
something
even
happens,
realize you have
yeah, you
them
don't
because they're
just
subconscious.
you have a lens on. I mean, the way I used to describe it is like if you were born with red lenses over your eyes and you never saw the world but through those lenses.
Mm-hmm.
If you or I were together and you didn't have red lenses and we looked at a white wall, we would both call it a white wall.
Right.
But if you looked through my eyes, it would be a pink wall.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now,
Right.
that's significant. That says, first of all, everything we see is unique to our ability to translate what we see.
I
Right?
love
So our
that.
beliefs
Yeah.
color our ability to translate things into reality. That's
Mm-hmm.
number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, anything that was the same color as the lens,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't see at all.
Oh, that's right.
Right?
Right.
So so opportunity is like that. So we're all
Um,
walking around literally bathed in opportunity. We
mm,
just can't see them because our belief structures are such that our lenses won't let us see the opportunity that if it were a snake, it would have bit you. Right.
ah,
So,
that is so huge, and I really want to explore that more, but we need to take a quick break, Steve, and then we'll come back to that because that was major. All right, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and today I am talking with a very special man who I like to call a giant of a man, although his name is Steve Little. That's an oxymoron for sure, Steve. But, Steve, before we went to break, You just said something so huge, and I find this to be true all the time because a lot of what I do in my work is help clients to neutralize those limiting
Yeah,
subconscious beliefs.
yeah,
And what's really mind-boggling about them is they are so powerful, and yet most of the time we don't even know we have them. We
mm,
keep thinking it's something out there that keeps
right,
making me have the same experience over and over again, right?
right, yes, yes,
And what you're saying is, no, it's because it's in here that I'm creating that experience and attracting it over and over again.
right, exactly right.
So, what do you find is one of the most effective things to do with that?
Effective is a powerful word. So it's interesting that there are many, many, many techniques, right? That experts like you, I'm sure, teach, and are some are more effective for some individuals than others, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I found in my case, because of the way my mind works, what worked for me first was the old Wallace D. Waddles technique called the science of getting rich.
Isn't he from back in the 20s or something when all the,
1920s. I think
yeah,
1919 and 1920. Yeah.
there was a lot of big souls that came through then.
Yes. There.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, Neville Goddard and him and
Mm-hmm.
Napoleon Hill. Right. That's all in
Yes.
the same general era, I think. Anyway, so that works for me. It's sort of a mechanical process, but that really worked for me.
And what
Right.
what was that process?
So the process is you you create lists. You take some paper. You put the top of the one stack of paper, things I have in my life I do not want.
Mm.
And then you just stream of consciousness, write them down.
Mm-hmm.
Just let it go. And it doesn't have to be legible. It doesn't have to be make sense. You know,
Yeah.
no one's going to read it. It's not like somebody's going to look at it and say anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can be doodles and scribbles, whatever it is. Just get it down, right?
Right.
What I tell people is, when you think you're done, take a break, come back, you'll get a couple more. But
Yep.
then you'll get them all, right? And you just
Mm-hmm.
take that, you put it aside. Then you take a second stack of paper and you put the top, things the way I want them to be, or my life the way I want it to be, or whatever the issue is. I mean, if
Okay.
my relationship the way I want it to be, or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you just create it the way you want it to be.
Uh-huh.
And use, good practice would be declarative, positive, affirmative statements that just
Sure.
make sense. And you do the same thing. You list all that out. I say do the same thing, take a break, come back, you'll get some more. Right now, you've got these two lists. You've got things that you have in your life that you do not want, and you have a list of the things the way you want them to be. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, you can be on a specific issue, or it can be more generic, like what I'm describing. It doesn't really matter. Then you take that first list, and this is a critically important step that often gets missed. You burn that list. You have to watch it burn.
Mm-hmm.
Because what's actually happening is there are neurological connections that are associated with everything you wrote on that list. And it's that neurology that you're destroying. So you're
Oh.
undoing those connections that
Mm-hmm.
cause you to subconsciously or unconsciously sabotage yourself
Yeah.
and create what's on that list.
Pulling the wiring in the subconscious mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So you watch that burn, and I like to say a little prayer over it, but
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Ho'oponopono is a good thing to do at the end of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And because remember, those things are part of your life, so you can love them, right?
Right.
So, and
Right.
then they're also the source of all your learning, but that's a whole nother topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you take the second list and you read it, you read through it, or at least scan it with your finger. You don't actually have to read the whole list. That doesn't really matter that much. I mean, your mind wrote it, it knows what's on the list.
Mm-hmm.
And you fold it up to a pocket sized piece of paper. And it doesn't say in the book to do this, but I added this. Is I write on the outside of that folded paper what's in there, like my life the way I want it, or
Ah.
you know
Mm-hmm.
my first $1 million, or whatever it is, right?
Yes.
And then you carry that paper on your person in a place where you'll acknowledge it, or you'll recognize it from time to time,
Mm-hmm.
like in a man's back pocket. Every time he sits down, he's going to feel the piece of paper.
Yeah.
Or if he reaches in for his billfold, the paper's going to be there, right? Like that.
Right.
Is in a woman's purse, maybe in the middle of the purse, where every time she opens the purse, she sees the paper, whatever the case
Mm-hmm.
must be. And what's happening is every time you see the paper, there's like a macro, like a program that's running in your head that's
Ah.
rewiring all the wiring you just ripped out with the burning exercise with the
Wow.
new stuff.
Wow. Yes.
Here's the
Yes.
amazing thing. It sounds crazy. I mean, then I said it was crazy first time I did it, right? I mean, can't be so. I mean, that's a silly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I have to admit, and everyone that I have taken through this process has come to me and it had to admit, and they've done it the same way. Like, I didn't think it was real, but I got to say, within a couple of weeks, some shit started to happen.
Wow.
Like, like
Wow.
something would happen to be like, no, not really. It's not, it's just coincidence that it's what I wrote down.
Yeah.
Right. But then the longer it goes, the more their life becomes like what's on that piece of paper.
Wow.
Pretty soon there's enough of it where you cannot deny the evidence that,
Mm-hmm.
this actually worked. Right. So that was my first experience of how to actually undo that bad programming and create new programming. And then
Mm-hmm.
we've added to that. I mean, Ho'oponopono is a great clearing method. There's dozens of them. There's lots of different ways to go about it. Um, I think what I would say in general is that having the awareness to recognize when clearing is in order is really the key.
Okay. Say a little bit more about that. How do you mean clearing
Yeah.
them in
Well, say
order?
say I'm driving on the highway, somebody cuts me off,
Mm-hmm.
right? My human response is, "Hey, screw you," or
Right.
whatever, right? Or I'm gonna run you off the road, or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's people can all identify with that, or the person in the checkout line, right? That
Mm-hmm.
whatever, right? We all have seen these things, and they trigger us, right?
Sure.
And if we're not aware that that is there's an element of energetic experience there that is a lesson, and it's an opportunity for us
Right.
to clean things up, right?
Ah.
Right. And so we either take the opportunity or we don't. And so if I don't take the opportunity, then I flip the guy off on the highway and go about my business, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've just added to the negative energetic experience of the entire universe, right? Great. Don't feel good about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
No.
Alternatively, if I recognize my reaction and say, well, wait a minute, that's me, that's not him, right? And if I
Mm-hmm.
clear that, even just suing, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. Say it 3 times to yourself. You don't have to do it out loud, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, then I'm doing the opposite. I'm neutralizing that negative energy that he
Right.
put out there.
Ah.
So I'm adding to the net balance of positive energy in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's really sort of the point. So if we were all 100% aware all the time, think about what that would actually mean.
Yes.
I mean, so what would it mean is he wouldn't have cut me off to begin with, and I wouldn't have been
Mm.
compelled to yell at him or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
it'd be a very different experience,
Because the
right?
whole collective consciousness would be functioning differently.
Totally, right?
Yeah.
And that's the tipping point. That's
Wow.
what we're looking for. Okay, right?
And what I really love about that is I think one of the biggest challenges for all of us is to try and keep our spiritual perspective or spiritual practices going when our earth experience sucks, right?
Yeah, it
When
does.
something happens, it's really hard to deal with.
Yeah,
And I know you've been there personally. We know that sometimes there's something you're just counting on happening and it doesn't happen.
yeah.
And what do you do when that happens, Steve? How do you stay grounded in a spiritual perspective when it's feeling like, God forgot my name, or could one more terrible thing happen?
Yeah. It's funny. There's a saying that I learned from Joe Vitale that I like to use in this case, and that's when the lesson is learned, you no longer need the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the trials that we experience are ours to experience for the learning opportunity that exists within them.
Ah,
And so it's hard to learn things at that level, though, because there's no like reference point.
yes,
No book to say you're moving in the right direction. And
right.
since it's an entire universe of energy, you really have no idea what the energetic source of the experience is, and you'll never find it. This is
Mm-hmm.
just like clearing your own limiting beliefs. It doesn't matter what your mom said to you when you were 6. It created something in your mind that you were living into throughout the rest of your
Mm-hmm.
life, and it causes you to self-sabotage.
Yes.
Knowing what she said doesn't matter. Knowing that something was said does. Okay,
Yes.
right? So, um,
Very true. Very true.
yeah,
And sometimes people get hung up on the trying to find out what she
yeah,
said
yeah,
or
yeah,
focusing way more on mom than
yeah.
on self.
Yeah, well, that's where it's like it's all my mom's fault, right? That's
Yeah.
no, it's still your responsibility. There's no fault to it.
Right.
She was doing
Right.
what she could do, and I learned a saying there that I use all the time. When people are not treating others the way that I think is they're meant to, and it's
Mm-hmm.
everyone is always expressing the highest level of love they have available to them. Now, it's really
Ooh, that's
interesting
really
about
good.
yeah, what's interesting about that expression is that say you're in a situation where somebody has really triggered you,
Mm-hmm.
you're really pissed about something, right?
Yeah.
And, you can explore that energy and go there if you want, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But again, if you're aware, and this is the challenge of enlightenment, I think, is being aware. If you can keep yourself aware
Yeah.
of the experience you're having, recognize that okay, I am uncomfortable, I'm angry, I'm anxious, I'm fearful, I'm sad, I'm whatever the negative emotion is. In this case, I'm choosing anger or frustration,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you were to look at the scenario, say it's somebody said something unkind to you or something like that.
Yeah.
If you can immediately, instead of responding to that or engaging in that energy, remember that everyone is always expressing the highest level of love they have available to them, then what that says is that's all they have available right now.
Yeah.
That's not much. That's all they've got.
Yeah.
And how sad that that's true. What
Mm-hmm.
happens is your anger, your frustration, your whatever switches to compassion.
Compassion.
And now you're
Wow.
only one minor degree away from love,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you took a
Mm-hmm.
huge leap from anger, which is way down here on the energy spectrum,
Right.
and passion, which is second only to love. You're
Mm.
right at the top, right? And
That's
then,
brilliant.
yeah, and all you need to
Brilliant.
do from there is say, well, how sad that that's all they have.
Yeah.
And now my reaction to that is going to be completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, my reaction will be such that it communicates love.
Mm.
Like, I fully appreciate that you're this upset. You know, here's maybe we can do this, or maybe this, or, whatever. Have you
Yes.
considered that, or whatever? It depends on the circumstance, of course. But so, anyway, so those are some of the things that come out of this sort of
Mm.
constant um, search, right? So when you're in an experience that isn't going the way you want, then it's your responsibility to look for the learning, right?
Yeah.
That's really the
Mm.
point. And I used to say, you've heard the expression, God won't give you anything you can't handle,
Yes.
right? Well, if that's true, then God must think I'm a badass.
Me
No.
too. I there was a saying that I remember one of the people in one of my grief groups early on in my career shared, and it was when God closes a door, he always opens a window. Dot, dot, dot. But it's hell in the hallway.
That's right.
So we had some nights that we just labeled hell in the hallway, you
That's right.
know?
That's true. It's true. Well, that's, such a fascinating thing. And when you're able to sort of look at your experience like that, sort of from a place of separation, it actually becomes sort of comical.
Becomes kind of what?
Comical. I mean, it's sort of
Comical.
funny. It's like,
Yes.
I mean, you can really laugh at that. It's like,
Yes.
I mean, how upset was I?
Yeah.
Or am I? Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how silly is this to be here?
Right.
Right? I mean, there's so many worse things that could
Oh,
be.
God, isn't that just so true? So true. And I think what I notice most in my own life and with clients is when we really get that energy going, whether it's anger or fear or whatever it is, we really kind of lose our ability to look at things in a realistic, logical perspective.
Oh, totally. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're insane. Like
you're
Eckhart
insane.
Tolle says, you're out of your mind. You
Yeah.
have no capacity for thought. You
And you know,
just
it's what's interesting. There was a study done at Harvard actually on meridian tapping, EFT, you may have
yeah,
heard it called.
yeah,
And they were just stimulating one point, in this case, on the side of the eye. And they were doing an fMRI in real time.
yeah.
So they were actually seeing what happened in the brain. And when the person was instructed to think about something upsetting, they saw that the frontal cortex shuts off,
Yeah,
the blood gets shunted to the amygdala,
yeah.
which is our fight, flight, or
That's right.
freeze
That's right.
mechanism.
Right.
So, of course, we go out of our minds,
Yeah.
because the thinking brain is shut off.
Yeah. And this is exactly true. And so it's really fascinating that we in the conversation we're having, we're approaching it sort of from a spiritual level,
Mm-hmm.
awareness level, and things you can do. But now scientifically speaking, it's affirmed that, well,
Yes.
yes, I mean, this is, we can actually see that that is actually happening. That it's not just
Yes.
an interpretation of your belief. It's actually
Yes.
really happening that way. And that's really pretty fascinating.
It
So
really
this
is.
is how it sort of all ties back to what I do in my practice, right? So I think I shared with you that one of the things I do that's different from many other investment bankers is I keep a Ho'oponopono journal on every client. So
Mm.
everybody I'm working with gets bathed in this at least once a day, right? So,
Nice.
right. And
Nice.
sometimes it's just, a brief statement of a
Mm-hmm.
prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Other times it's an elicitation of an energetic shift associated with a problem or a challenge or a difficulty, right? But what I find is that that is the most powerful way to address this losing their mind. They don't
Yeah.
they don't have that experience, right? That's not what they
Yes.
experience at all. As a matter of fact, they don't really know that I'm doing this. They don't really know why.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of them will say to me, and these are the words I want on my tombstone, so it's a great pleasure to hear it. Is at the end of it, they go, "I don't know what it was, man, but it's like it's a joy to work with you. Just
Oh,
joyful
nice.
working with you,
Yes.
right?" And that's when I know I'm moving things the way they should be.
Mm-hmm.
You don't ordinarily hear that.
No, you don't. And energetically, everybody who's in our field, whether we're thinking about them or they're standing somewhere near us, is most definitely impacted by our energy.
Oh, no
So,
question.
what I hear you saying is as you just keep cleaning your own energy, you're just this higher and higher vibration that takes people with you.
Yeah,
And they don't even know what's
they
happening. I
don't
mean,
even
it's
know.
so beautiful.
But they do know that they're, but what I know is they're not going to have any problems with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve, I am so adoring this conversation, and you have to swear to me you'll come back
Oh,
because
sure.
we are out of time. But please tell our listeners, how do they find you if they're interested in the work you do? And there'll be lots of info on you in the show notes, of course. But
Mm-hmm.
what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do have a website for the business. It's called Zero Limits Ventures, zerolimitsventures.com.
Mm-hmm.
There's, a form up there you can fill out to contact me. You can always just send me an email, steve at zerolimitsventures.com. Um, that's it, really. I mean, nothing better than that.
Okay. And I think there's nothing better than you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Steve, for blessing us with your presence today. You shared some things that were just super nuggets, and I'm delighted that you responded to my invitation and that you were with us today.
Oh,
So,
absolutely my pleasure. Thank you
mm,
very much.
blessings, Steve.
Thank
And I look forward to seeing you soon.
you. Okay.
And to our listeners, you can find this show on any podcast platform, including the latest and greatest and my favorite, Padapalo.
Mm.
So be sure and find us, subscribe, leave some likes, let us know what you like. All right. And of course, the show notes on Steve will be on changeupupradio.com. All right. Thank you, Steve.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye bye.